Hello there. Tonight, we are going somewhere most humans will never go. Beneath the surface of the ocean, into the places where light fails and pressure builds, and the rules that govern the world above stop applying quite so neatly. We are going to drift through more than 100 of the strangest, most quietly inexplicable things ever recorded in the deep. Signals that arrived before they were sent, ships found intact and empty with breakfast still warm on the table, structures on the seafloor that predate any civilization we know about, and things in the dark that turned and looked back. Before we begin, take a moment to subscribe and like the video, and leave a comment telling me where you are listening from and what time it is for you. Now let's begin. There are places in the deep ocean where sound travels in ways that our instruments can measure but our intuitions cannot follow. In 2014, a research team lowering a hydrophone array into the Western Pacific recorded a tone they initially believed was equipment interference. A clean, rising note that lasted approximately 9 seconds, then stopped. When they reviewed the spectrogram later that evening, the note was there, exactly as heard. But beside it, 17 seconds earlier in the timeline, was a faint echo of the same tone. Not an echo that came after the sound, but one that arrived before it. The mathematics of sound propagation at depth have no mechanism for this. Sound does not preview itself. And yet the recording showed clearly a faint ghost of the tone 17 seconds before the tone itself existed. The team published a cautious footnote in their data log, describing it as an unexplained pre-signal anomaly, and moved on. Nobody moved on. The recording has been analyzed by acoustic engineers and physicists for a decade, and the most honest assessment remains: the sound knew it was coming. The sea floor of the Nazca Plate off the western coast of South America is covered in what geologists call abyssal sediment, fine, soft material that accumulates over millions of years of particles sinking from the world above. It should be featureless. In 2018, a mapping submersible crossing a section of this plain at approximately 4,200 meters depth recorded a formation that the team lead described simply as a drawing. Pressed into the sediment, not scraped, not gouged, but pressed, as if by something that understood pressure gradients, was an elongated spiral approximately 800 meters across, its lines perfectly consistent in depth and width, tapering inward in a ratio that a mathematician on the team identified within 20 minutes as the Fibonacci spiral. It was not a crack. Cracks are irregular. It was not a current pattern. Currents at this depth do not form closed spirals with mathematical precision. It was not an animal feeding trail, because no animal we know of operates at this scale with this geometry. The formation was there. They photographed it. They went back 3 months later, and it was still there, and the edges, if anything, were slightly more defined, as if the thing that made it had come back to tidy the lines. There is a brine pool in the Gulf of Mexico at a depth of around 650 meters that oceanographers have visited dozens of times because it is, in the vocabulary of the deep sea, a place of genuine wonder. Brine pools form when salt deposits left by ancient seas dissolve into the ocean above them, creating water so dense it sinks and pools on the seafloor like a lake inside the sea. This one has a shoreline. It has waves. Its surface reflects the lights of submersibles that hover above it. Fish that swim into it do not come back out. But this particular brine pool, the one visited for decades by researchers from institutions across North America, has an unusual property. It moves, not in the way that currents move. It has a direction. It has maintained that direction across every survey conducted since its discovery. Something is driving it, or it is going somewhere, and the two are not the same thing, and neither has been explained. In 2009, an ROV following the pool's leading edge descended into a cave system and lost contact. What came back up the tether was sound, a low, rhythmically pulsed hum that the technicians described as folded, as if a signal had been compressed and returned in pieces. The ROV was never recovered. The pool is still moving. The dive that produced no footage began as a survey of a newly mapped hydrothermal vent field near the Sangihe Arc in the Malacca Sea. 2 divers, standard tethered equipment. One of them, a woman with 14 years of deep work behind her, was gone before the surface crew understood that something had changed. The remaining diver surfaced white-faced and silent and did not speak for 2 hours. When he finally gave his account, he said she had heard something. Not through the communication equipment. He had watched her turn her head in the way that people turn their heads when they hear their name spoken behind them, and then she had oriented herself toward the vent's edge, and then she had gone down. His body camera had malfunctioned. A single frame of usable footage survived from the 12 minutes around her disappearance, and what it showed was a hand level with the vent's rim, fingers pointing upward, either reaching for help or, depending on how long you look at it, waving goodbye. She was never found. The tether had been cut cleanly, not abraded. The vent field below that site has not been surveyed since, not because of regulation, because no team has agreed to go. Off the northern coast of the Faroe Islands, there is a patch of ocean approximately 12 nautical miles across that does not appear on any official danger chart and carries no formal designation in the maritime records. It appears instead in the verbal handoffs between captains in the ports of Tórshavn and Klaksvík, a patch of coordinates spoken quietly, avoided without drama, treated the way experienced people treat things they understand to be real without being able to explain why they are real. Fishermen call it simply the drop. When vessels cross its edge, compasses behave erratically. Nets come up wrong. Not empty, but wrong, shredded in spiral patterns with no snagging mechanism to account for the shape of the damage. Fish caught on the boundary come up glazed and stiff in a way that is different from the normal stiffness of a caught fish, a way that the older fishermen describe as having been stopped mid-moment, as if the fish had experienced something so sudden that the body did not have time to register dying. One vessel, the Olefin, in 2003, brought up from that area a barnacled fragment of metal stamped with a marking that no one on board could identify, not a flag, not a letter, not a registration code, something older and more deliberate, and that fragment was photographed and sent to a university for analysis and vanished somewhere in the system before an analysis was ever completed. The fishermen do not tell this as a ghost story. They tell it as a fact about a place that asks something from you if you pass too close. Monitoring buoy number 17, deployed west of the mid-Atlantic ridge as part of a passive seismic monitoring network, transmitted a standard signal every 90 seconds for 6 days and then went silent. No storm, no anomaly in the last transmission. The anchor line was found intact when divers investigated. The buoy was simply absent, the line trailing into open water. 2 weeks later, a listening station in the northern Pacific received a single ping at exactly the frequency and identification code of buoy 17. This was geometrically impossible. No current pattern in the Atlantic or across the Pacific moves floating objects across that distance in 2 weeks. The ping was triangulated. Its origin placed it near the Kerguelen Plateau in the southern Indian Ocean, a third ocean entirely. Before a vessel could be dispatched to investigate, the ping ceased. The final fragment of data transmitted by buoy 17 before its disappearance contained something that had not been part of its original programming, a sound file 18 seconds long consisting of a rhythmic organic pulse that the team's senior analyst described as breathing through metal. Its replacement, buoy 18, disappeared on its 4th day of operation. No replacement has been deployed in that sector. The trawler Elvira was working squid grounds north of the Weddell Sea when her crew pulled up something in the mesh that none of them could name. It was translucent. It was webbed with circuitry-like vein structures that pulsed with a blue-white light under the deck lamps. It had two recessed structures that everyone on board independently described as eyes, though they were not shaped like eyes or positioned like eyes in any familiar arrangement. They pulsed, not randomly, in a pattern. One crew member reached to touch it and withdrew his hand immediately, blistered with a cold so sudden and complete that the ship's medic compared the tissue damage to a cryogenic burn. The deck temperature in the immediate vicinity dropped measurably. The cameras jammed, the lights flickered. The crew released it back within 4 minutes, not in panic, but in the unanimous quiet decision of people who have understood something without being able to say what they have understood. What they said afterward was that the light it produced was not illumination, it was communication, something trying to understand where it was and who had touched it. The ship's log listed the encounter as an unclassified gelatinous mass, but the crew called it something else among themselves, and they did not call it that lightly. The storm that arrived off Mozambique without forecast, without satellite warning, without pressure differential or wind shear to announce it. It rose from a flat horizon in minutes and closed around the freighter Adriana like a fist, and then the voices began. Not on the radio, through the hull, through the deck plates and the ventilation and the structural members of the ship itself, as if the metal were a medium and something was using it. Dozens of voices, the crew agreed, though they disagreed on whether they were close or distant, whether they were male or female, whether they were speaking or whispering or something between the two that has no name in the taxonomy of human sound production. But they agreed on the content, names, first names and last names, none of them belonging to anyone aboard, read or recited in a patient sequence, like a list being worked through. One deckhand began repeating a name under his breath that he could not account for. He had not been asleep. He did not recognize the name as one from his own life. When the name was searched later, it belonged to a sailor lost off the same stretch of coast. In 1897, the storm broke apart without striking. The rain circled the vessel without falling. And when the ship's black box audio was analyzed afterward, beneath the system logs, there was a murmuring, looping in breath-shaped consonants, and one fragment was unambiguous, the captain's name, in a voice that was not the captain's. The structure west of the Azores Plateau, that sonar mapping first registered in 2011 as a possible natural extrusion, a volcanic spire, an unusual mineral formation, was revisited 6 months later and had grown by 5 meters. Its edges were cleaner than before, its corners more defined, the erosion of the deep sea running backward or not running at all. It was approximately 20 meters tall on first survey. On the second visit it was 25. The surface, when a submersible approached close enough for a camera to resolve the detail, was not stone. Beneath a crust of mineral accretion was something smoother and darker, a material that absorbed light rather than reflecting it, that distorted the shadows around it, that appeared to have a temperature profile inconsistent with ambient seawater. When a diver extended a probe to collect a sample, every light on the submersible dimmed simultaneously. Instruments flickered, depth sensors gave 3 different readings at once. The probe was withdrawn, the lights returned, the structure was surveyed again 2 years later. It had grown again. Satellite analysis over the following decade showed that its growth coincided not with local seismic activity, but with major seismic events in geographically unrelated parts of the world. A quake in Chile, a landslide near Japan. And each time, weeks later, the structure added something, a ring, a refinement, a slight increase in the precision of its form. One diver, speaking quietly on the return trip, said, "It's not a monument, it's a route marker, it's measuring something." At 9,200 meters in a trench near the Sulu Sea, during a dive in 2014, the compass of a 2-person submersible began to behave in a way that compasses do not behave. It moved west, held, moved east, moved south, spun. Not wildly, not broken, deliberately, as if working through a set of directions in sequence. The pilots attributed it to equipment malfunction and noted it in the log. When the compass was removed and brought to sea level, it continued to spin, slowly, endlessly, as though it had been set to a cycle it could not stop. 5 compasses used in that trench over the following month malfunctioned identically. One, recovered weeks after it was thought lost, had an etching on its brass housing, a spiral, thin and precise, that had not been there before. Nobody carved it. The lines followed the shape of orbital decay, something bending through invisible fields. The divers who worked that trench in the months that followed reported vertigo, auditory pulses, light where there was no light source. One said the trench hummed, another said it was like standing inside a turning mechanism, feeling the rotation but unable to see the gears. South of the Pitcairn Islands, in a stretch of abyssal plain where volcanic debris and grey sediment stretched to every horizon, a team of marine ecologists in 2019 found a coral field that was not alive in the way coral is supposed to be alive, and not dead in the way coral is supposed to be dead. It was pale, it was still. No fish moved through it, no anemones attached to its branches, but when hydrophones were deployed along its edge, they recorded a sound, not a hum, not a biological call, but a sound with shape, a sound that modulated and built and dipped in a way that one marine technician described as breathing through 1,000 broken whistles, and another described as almost like words, turned by distortion into something that was not quite language, but had the structure of language, the rhythm of intention. When a diver touched one of the coral stalks, a ripple passed across the whole field. Not a current ripple, an electrical ripple or something like it, spreading from the point of contact outward in a ring. The team took samples, most disintegrated on the way up. One survived. Under the microscope, its pores were not the pores of coral at all. They were cochlear chambers, structures evolved for receiving sound. The reef was not dead and not alive in the ways we have categories for. It was listening, and it had started answering something. The sandbar that appeared in the northern Bering Sea has been appearing and disappearing from charts for 60 years, which would not be unusual. Sandbars migrate, sandbars erode, except that this one appears in exactly the same position every time. A clean crescent of pale sand in an area of open water with no underwater feature that could generate or sustain it. Satellite surveys have captured it in 3 separate decades. Soviet records from 1963 mention a vessel, the Novoselsk, reporting a coastal feature inconsistent with previous charts, and then going silent. A Japanese fishing boat's log recovered in 1965 described an arc of golden sand with the masts of submerged ships protruding from the shallows, and a sketch of the formation that matched the satellite coordinates exactly. A survey vessel dispatched in 2004 observed the sandbar reform at nightfall from what had been open water at noon, saw the sand rise in a clean crescent as if something below were pressing upward, and then both the observing vessel and a closer vessel sent to investigate are no longer listed in any publicly accessible maritime registry. The sandbar has no geological explanation. The fishermen who know these waters say it's not a sandbar, it has a mouth and it is patient. In the deep water off the coast of Madagascar, at approximately 3,000 meters, a neutrally buoyant instrument array designed to map horizontal current patterns recorded something that violated the most fundamental principle of how ocean water moves. The instruments rose, not because of a thermal vent pushing them upward, not because of a seismic event. They rose in a perfectly vertical column, in a perfectly still and perfectly controlled ascent, as if something below had decided to lift them. An ROV dispatched to the location entered the column and confirmed it. A current flowing vertically upward with no turbulence, no thermocline disruption, no detectable energy source. For 37 seconds, the ROV rose without propulsion. Internal logs confirmed no engine use. The current then ceased, the ROV dropped, and when the instrument array was recovered, the outer casings had been warped, not crushed, not abraded, but stretched, as if each instrument had been grasped and pulled from all sides simultaneously. The thermocline in the area was undisturbed, tidal forces were normal, gravity was, as far as any instrument could detect, functioning correctly, and yet something in that ravine had reached upward, briefly, as if remembering how to climb, and then it let go. At full 800 meters in the Crozet Basin of the southern Indian Ocean, a team searching for manganese nodules found a stone slab, rectangular, too precise to have tumbled there, too large and too heavy to have arrived by any mechanism they could reconstruct. One edge was buried, the other tilted slightly as if placed with care. The surface was covered in shallow grooves, not cracks, not erosion lines, deliberate incisions forming curves and channels that, the longer the team studied them, the more they resolved into a map. One diver traced a peninsula that no longer existed above water. Another identified a mountain range buried under the Greenland shelf. A third found what appeared to be the outline of an island group that sits today at the bottom of the Pacific, a volcanic arc that submerged approximately 12,000 years ago. The map was of a world that no longer exists. At its center was a blank circle, not unlabeled, not damaged, just empty, a space deliberately left, as if the map maker knew that whatever should go there was something that could not be drawn. When a submersible arm attempted to move the slab, it did not move, not anchored, not sediment stuck, simply rooted. 3 weeks later, when the team returned, the slab was gone. The seafloor was smooth, undisturbed, as if it had never been there. Except in the teeth of the robotic claw, a fragment of stone, a corner of the map, showing a coastline from before the ice retreated. The corner it showed was not Earth. East of Bermuda, the thermocline, the boundary layer between warm surface water and cold deep water, has been observed on multiple occasions since 2008 to move, not simply to shift in depth, which is normal, but to travel horizontally against the current, like something large and invisible pushing through the density layers of the ocean, leaving the thermocline disturbed in its wake the way a boat disturbs the surface. The first recorded observation came from a NOAA vessel testing subsurface drift patterns. A second came 3 weeks later from a Portuguese deep-sea glider that tracked the same shifting wall, moving hundreds of miles in the wrong direction. Geothermal explanations have been proposed and do not hold. The movement is too clean, too consistent in direction. Divers who have been in the water when the thermocline passed described it as the ocean thinking around them, a pressure and a presence that was not a current and not a temperature change, but something that used both to announce its passing. One diver's final log before she left the project read, "I didn't hit the thermocline, it hit me." It felt like standing on a staircase that steps away. I felt the water thinking. The iron chain on the seafloor off Namibia was found by a mineral survey drone at approximately 700 meters, heavy links, ship-sized, corroding but not corroded beyond recognition, trailing northward across the ocean floor in a path that the drone followed for 600 meters before the survey window closed. No ship, no anchor, no wreck in the vicinity that could have produced a chain of this scale. On a second dive, the chain was found to be continuing. It had no visible origin point in any direction the drone surveyed. Coral had grown along the links in a pattern that a marine biologist immediately noted as non-biological, perfect rings, 3 per link, equally spaced, as if marking intervals, Under ultraviolet light, the coral rings glowed faintly. Samples showed their internal structure mirrored the propagation patterns of sound waves, not biological growth patterns. The chain had generated a frequency, or been placed in the presence of one, and the coral had grown to the shape of that frequency the way iron filings grow to the shape of a magnetic field. The chain continued to the edge of a trench cliff. The final link sat at the drop, not anchored, not snapped, simply ending, as if the rest had been taken somewhere vertical. The team named it the Wayfinder. Nobody believes it was made for ships. The Solaris 6, conducting a month-long acoustic survey near the Kerguelen Trench, recorded a bell. One pure, resonant, unwavering chime from open ocean at approximately 9,800 meters depth. Not a metallic impact, not a geological percussion event. A bell tone, the kind produced by a tuned instrument with the harmonic decay structure of something made to ring. The team played it back twice before anyone spoke. The third time they played it, it rang again in the actual water. Same pitch, same decay. This time with harmonics layered beneath it, a timed pattern buried in the low hum. 3 pulses, pause, 5 shorter chimes, a structure that one signal engineer described as code or call and response. An ROV was sent down. At 9,600 meters, something large moved through its sonar field, not solid, but dense, a curtain of density sweeping across the deep. And the bell rang again, close enough this time that the signal engineer described it as being rung from the inside out. Not heard, inhabited. When the ROV was recovered, etched on its titanium housing were thin arcs forming a near-perfect circle, as if it had passed through a gate and been marked for having done so. No ships were lost in that trench, no cultures left records of anything built there, but something rings that bell. And when it rings in a pattern that waits for a reply. Station Delta was a modular oceanographic outpost hovering in the mid-Atlantic abyss between 2 fracture zones, staffed by 3 researchers, designed for benthic migration observation. Its last coherent transmission came at 0412 UTC, water temperature, salinity, pressure, standard readings. Then a pause, then one voice, male, close to the microphone, whispering in a measured repetition, "Don't go outside," then static, and beneath the static, buried in the lower frequency range, wet clicks and long, slow reverberations like chains dragged across silt. The recovery team arrived 6 hours later. The station was intact, lights on, every system functioning, the airlock sealed from the inside. When they breached it, the central console had melted, not burned, melted, as though heat had radiated outward from within the metal itself. The logs were unreadable, the auxiliary systems had been wiped. The researchers were not present, no suits were missing, 3 bunks undisturbed, a pot of coffee, half finished, still warm. Audio analysis of the final transmission static later found, in the lowest hertz range, a signature, a pulse, then a pattern, then a silence so complete and so structured that the analyst who identified it described it as the kind of silence that doesn't occur naturally, the kind that replaces something. The coordinates of Station Delta are now listed in the relevant databases as an acoustic interference zone. Nobody has placed anything there since. Whatever arrived at Station Delta did not leave damage. It left absence. The grid on the floor of the Clarion-Clipperton zone was first observed in sonar data as a compression artifact. Straight lines, right angles, regularity where the deep seafloor offers none of these things. When a submersible passed directly over the coordinates, the camera confirmed it. A series of intersecting paths, grooves pressed into the silt, running for kilometers in a 9 by 12 block formation, each intersection aligned to true north regardless of the seafloor's slow drift. The grooves were old, encrusted with benthic organisms softened at their edges by time. Sediment core analysis suggested they had been made before the manganese nodules that now cluster along their edges began growing, a minimum age of 5 million years. On a second dive, an ROV followed one row to a raised platform at the grid's edge. The platform was elevated above the surrounding floor, carved on its surface with 3 spiral notches converging at a central depression. The feed went black. When it restored, the ROV was 2 kilometers east and had no memory of the intervening time. Every drone subsequently sent to chart the grid's full extent has returned incomplete, scrambled, or not at all. The grid continues. No one knows what it represents, what it was for, or how it has maintained its alignment to true north through 5 million years of tectonic drift. It should not be aligned. And yet, the net that came back burned from a depth of 2,400 meters in waters near the Kuril Islands was a standard deep trawl net, nylon and steel, rated for exactly those conditions. When the winch brought it up, the nylon had fused into clumps like candle wax. The metal rigging had warped. One hook was missing, its tether snapped clean. The air around the net above water smelled of ozone and scorched salt. The smell of lightning, except there had been no lightning and the net had been 2.5 kilometers underwater. Nets do not burn at depth. There is no mechanism. And yet the evidence of burning was unambiguous to every person on deck. The sonar log from the descent showed one anomaly, a soft blip at precisely 2,880 meters, a brief disturbance in the water column the shape of a sphere. The ship's medic, who had not touched the net, began coughing 2 days later. When scanned at port, radiology found shadows in his lungs, circular, evenly spaced, not cancer, not infection. Mapped as if something had passed through him and left a record of its passage. Lab analysis of net samples returned mostly unreadable results. One lab, unofficially, wrote in the margin of their handwritten notes, "Not melted, rewritten." The brine pool in the Gulf of Mexico that oceanographers call the jacuzzi of despair, named for the way it kills the creatures that enter it, quickly and without apparent violence, has a surface that ripples with no wind source, waves that lap against salt-encrusted shores with the regularity of tides that do not correspond to any lunar cycle. Its boundary with the surrounding seawater is so precise it appears artificial, a line so clean that submersible pilots have hovered at it for minutes, trying to understand what maintains it. A sensor dropped into the pool's center descended for 45 meters recording audio before the signal cut. When recovered, the casing had warped inward, not crushed outward by pressure, but pulled inward as if something below had gripped it and squeezed. The audio from the 45 minutes before signal loss contained, building gradually from the background of shifting brine, a vibration that grew louder the deeper the sensor sank. At 40 meters, it was unmistakable, a rhythm, measured, slow, like bellows or like breath. The lake is mapped, it has a name, it has coordinates that appear in peer-reviewed oceanographic literature, and none of that changes what a pilot whispered after his first dive into it. The lake is awake, and it's been awake for a very long time. The sonar image from the Scotia Sea contained a frame. One frame, captured by a remotely operated vehicle during a routine trench survey, of a shape. Upright, standing on the seafloor, tall, thin, proportioned in a way that registered to every person who reviewed the footage as immediately and deeply wrong, not monstrous, not threatening. Wrong, in the specific way that a thing is wrong when it is in a place or a configuration that all of your pattern recognition tells you it should not be. The technician who flagged the frame called 2 colleagues. Each described the same experience. Not fear exactly, but dislocation, the sense of being watched from inside the screen rather than looking into it. The ROV was sent back. The shape was there again. Not hidden, not fleeing, standing. The footage was reviewed by multiple analysts over subsequent weeks, and every analyst described the shape differently. One said arms, one said antenna, one said it was leaning forward, one said it smiled. And this consistency of description with inconsistency of detail has not been explained satisfactorily. The lead technician left the project after the third dive without explanation. His personal log, which circulated later, contained one line repeated across 30 pages. It knew I was watching. The black sphere recovered from the Puerto Rico trench at 8,600 meters was approximately 30 centimeters in diameter and had no seam, no fracture, no identifying mark. Its surface was warm to the touch, warmer than the surrounding water, warmer than the air above deck, and it remained at exactly that temperature regardless of environment, indoors, outdoors, in a cold storage unit, in a controlled laboratory. Instruments detected no radiation, no magnetic field, no chemical signature. But the pressure sensors told a different story. Everything at that depth compresses and groans under the load of kilometers of ocean. The sphere showed zero pressure gradient in its immediate vicinity, as if it existed inside a bubble of normal atmospheric conditions that the ocean could not enter. On the surface, this property held in vacuum chambers on aircraft. The sphere's immediate radius denied pressure universally. Contact with its surface was impossible. Tools did not grip it. They deflected, recoiled, slid off as if contact were not permitted. In the nights that followed its recovery, researchers who worked alone with the sphere reported sounds, not voices, tones, harmonic pulses rising and falling just below the threshold of conscious hearing, but felt in the chest cavity, in the inner ear, in the sinuses. A geophysicist called it the sound of gravity folding. The sphere disappeared from a locked laboratory 3 weeks after recovery. 12 seconds of blank surveillance footage, no alarm, no breach. What remained was the data and a faint indentation in the foam padding of its storage case, perfectly spherical, exactly its size. The listening buoy off Cape Hatteras, positioned to monitor whale migration and low-frequency seismic activity, recorded on a windless night in late September a sound that no analyst has successfully classified. It lasted 4 seconds and 11 frames. It began with a low-pressure fluctuation faster than any wave, smoother than any geological event, and then the sound itself, long, wet, drawn from somewhere deep, with a waveform that one marine biologist described as an exhale held too long, and that a linguist described more precisely as having the timing and amplitude structure of human speech without the formants that make speech intelligible, the shape of speech without the language. What struck the analysts most was what preceded it. 12 seconds of complete silence before the sound, not reduced noise, zero noise, no current, no biological activity, no background frequency of any kind. The kind of silence that does not occur naturally in open ocean, where something always makes sound, as if something enormous had stilled every other process in its vicinity before it breathed. The buoy has recorded the same sound in the same 12-second silence frame on the same date every year since. Each year it is fractionally louder. Whatever is practicing, it is getting closer to being ready. The island appeared at 04:22 on the morning of August 17th in a satellite pass over the South Pacific. Clear imagery, no cloud, no sensor error. A landmass approximately 3 kilometers across, green interior, white surf, a shadow on the western cliff that might have been a structure. The geological survey team notified reached the coordinates 12 hours later by reconnaissance flight. Open ocean. Thousands of meters of open ocean to the bottom, in an area with no tectonic history that would support a seamount anywhere near the surface. The imagery was confirmed by 3 independent satellite passes. A yacht that had passed near the area reported visual contact. Birds in the air, driftwood at the shore, a flicker of light near the tree line, and then fog that arrived without meteorological cause and left the coordinates empty of land before it cleared. The yacht's GPS had looped, the same coordinates repeating in the memory. The deck audio recorded one voice, not attributed to any crew member, speaking quietly from near the bow microphone. It didn't want us to remember. The island has appeared twice more in satellite imagery since that morning. Each time, for 3 or 4 frames, each time the coordinates are the same. Each time it is gone before a vessel can reach it. It appears to understand that it is being watched. The eye in the trench wall was filmed by an unmanned submersible on a test descent off Chile's coast. A camera sweep of a canyon ridge, routine, the kind of footage that is reviewed afterward rather than in real time. At frame 214, in a shallow indentation in the rock face, something looked back into the lens, round, pale grey, approximately half a metre across, no body attached, no context, no creature visible beyond the single structure. It blinked, not a shutter artifact, not lens flare. The blink had depth, movement, the specific fluid mechanics of a biological eye performing the action it evolved to perform. Frame 215 was empty rock. When analysts reviewed the footage, one left the project and never returned. The remaining frames of the descent showed in the navigation log a 3-frame loop. Time had folded somewhere around the moment of the eye's appearance, and the same 3 seconds had been recorded twice. After those seconds, 11 extra seconds at the end of the recording, blank and dark, no audio, and at their close a single, low resonance, pulsing once through the file, like breath drawn through a flute of stone. The eye has not appeared in any subsequent dive to those coordinates, but the team that reviewed the footage has quietly, individually, over the following years, stopped working in deep ocean research. Not together, not as a decision. They just each, separately, stopped. The sand on the ridge near the Galapagos Rift was dark as ink and lit from within. Waves of dim violet and blue rippling beneath the grains in a slow pulse that had nothing to do with the hydrothermal activity of the area. No heat, no chemical process, just light emanating from particulate matter on the ocean floor. One diver touched it. The light changed, sharpened, became focused on the point of contact. The sample scooped into a collection jar arrived at the surface as cold, dark, inert dust, lifeless under every analysis. But the footage proved otherwise. The light had been real. When the team returned to the site, the sand was gone, not scattered, not disturbed, simply absent, lifted clean from the seafloor without any mechanism available at those depths to move it in that way. Weeks later, one researcher found black dust gathering near the air filtration vents in his laboratory. He had not brought any under ultraviolet light. The dust pulsed, the same cold violet as before. He sealed it. He has not thrown it away. Some things, he has said since, do not stay where you leave them. Some things follow you because they are trying to understand what you are. The shelf of translucent stone off Greenland's coast, smooth and glass flat across ancient rock, was discovered during a routine survey of submerged plateau formations. It stretched for kilometers unbroken. Beneath it, sonar returned readings of movement, not tectonic movement, not thermal flow, but something deliberate, slow like fluid, guided by intention rather than pressure. Divers sent to the shelf reported that all sound stopped the moment they reached it. Not that the ocean grew quieter. All sound stopped. Their own breathing was inaudible. The regulators made no noise. And then the shelf spoke, or something beneath it did. A low rhythmic murmuring that came through the stone and through the water, and into the body of each diver simultaneously, each hearing it differently, but each hearing something. One heard humming, one heard singing, one heard a woman crying at a frequency that matched no human biological output. They recorded it. The recordings returned as static, but the file lengths matched the murmur's exact rhythm, not sound, timing. Something had been captured, not the content of the message, but the structure of when it arrived, as if the shelf were communicating in the intervals between words rather than in the words themselves. A geologist reviewing the vibration patterns later found a waveform repeating in the background of every sonar pass. Slow, deliberate, ordered. Translated into visual form, it resembled writing. Not any script, just ordered. The shelf continues to speak to every vessel that passes near it. The crews sleep poorly. They wake with phrases on their tongues, phrases in no language they have studied. The wreck, found east of the Azores, was sitting upright on the seafloor at 1,200 meters with no name, no registry, no flag, and no deterioration. The barnacles and algae that should have claimed it over years of immersion had not. The metal was sound, the windows were unbroken, and inside, confirmed by the ROV camera that pushed through a gap in the stern, there was air. Not a pocket, not a trapped bubble, but a sustained internal atmosphere that the instruments registered as normal pressure, breathable composition, actively maintained. Objects inside floated slightly as if the specific gravity of the interior space had been adjusted by a fraction. A rusted pen lay across an open logbook, ink unblurred. A compass sat aligned to magnetic north. A teacup was half full of liquid that had not evaporated. The final entry in the logbook, ink preserved as if written that morning, read, "Descending now, light holding. No date, no coordinates, no continuation." The ROV, moving further into the ship, encountered a coat suspended in mid-room, drifting gently, waiting. When the ROV withdrew, a thin mist followed it out into the surrounding water and dissolved. Pressure sensors aboard the survey ship registered a single-degree drop in cabin temperature. The smell of ozone. The wreck was marked as structurally unstable and not revisited. The air inside it is still there. Someone is still holding that breath. In the Sulu Sea, in the twilight zone between 200 and 1,000 meters, where light fades to nothing, a cracked and century-old wreck had been colonized by lights. Not bioluminescent organisms, not chemical reactions. Lights. Focused, deliberate, each one its own color, deep blue and amber and violet, moving through the interior of the broken ship with the specific purposefulness of things that remember the architecture they inhabit. The team's submersible kept its distance. The lights responded to its presence, not aggressively, curiously, retreating and returning, spiraling slowly through the cabins as if learning to walk through them again. One by one, they gathered at the base of the mast, rose in a slow spiral through the open wreck, passing through walls as if physical boundaries had become suggestions. 7 minutes of this. Then they were gone. Not dimmed, not drifted, simply gone. The wreck has not been located since. The coordinates lead to open seabed, no debris, no sign of collapse or burial, as if the ship had come to be seen, had been seen, and had left. One diver, days later, found that when he closed his eyes, he could still see a flicker in the dark, could still hear the low creak of a mast swaying in water that no longer held it. He has not reported this to anyone in an official capacity. He told it to his wife. She told him the light was still there the following morning, in his eyes, just for a moment, when he first woke up. The fog that rose without forecast in the Java Sea didn't behave like fog. It was dense and directional, and it carried warmth. It moved against the wind. Ships that entered it reported that their wakes disappeared behind them, absorbed, as if the fog were consuming the evidence of their passage. Radio communications inside the fog were not blocked. They were returned. Every transmission sent outward came back seconds later in a slightly different form, as if something in the fog were processing the signal and sending back a response that nearly matched the original, but not quite. One captain's distress call was returned to him with a change in the final word. Where he had broadcast his coordinates and said "we are stationary," the return said "we are descending." The fog cleared after 11 hours. Every vessel that had been inside it emerged intact, crew unharmed. But the ship's logs from the period inside the fog were uniformly blank, not deleted. The paper logs showed indentations from pen strokes with no ink. The digital logs showed write activity with no saved data. 11 hours of experience that left no record. The navigational charts showed no anomalous track. Every vessel had simply held position, as if the fog were a parenthesis in time, a bracket opened and closed around something that the sea was not yet ready to have witnessed. The monolith off the Juan de Fuca Ridge rose from the seafloor steam vents in a plume that cameras first captured as a city. Towers, arches, spires, a geometry in the hydrothermal vapor that had the appearance of intention, not of nature, building randomly upward, but of structure, design, proportion, pathways and courtyards glimpsed through the steam and then withdrawn. The drone systems dimmed. A low hum vibrated through the audio feed. Then a soft red glow from the vent itself, too steady for magma, too measured for thermal fluctuation. When the footage was reviewed frame by frame, the analysts found something between the structures. Movement, not the movement of the steam. Movement within the steam, figures tall and thin walking paths that no longer existed, following routes through a city that the heat had made briefly visible, oblivious to the camera, oblivious to the lights, simply proceeding. The footage was stored offline. The coordinates were erased from official map. Those who saw it do not speak about it publicly. What they say privately to people they trust is not that they saw something frightening. It is that they saw something that seemed more at home than they have ever felt anywhere. A city not made of stone, made of heat and memory and the particular patience of something that has been here long before us and has no reason to hurry. The submersible recovered after the Santiago trench test descent had 11 extra seconds at the end of its recording. Blank, dark, no audio. And at the close of those seconds, a pulse, low, resonant, a frequency that the engineer who analyzed it could only describe as a response. The submersible had been down for 4 hours and returned normally, all systems nominal. But the pilot who had been monitoring remotely reported that during a 3-frame loop in the navigation log, the same 3 seconds played back twice, he had felt a specific physical sensation in his sternum, a pressure, not painful, more like recognition, the kind of feeling you get when you hear a piece of music you have not heard since childhood, the body remembering something before the mind does. He filed this observation in the mission notes. The mission notes were later removed from the public dataset. A researcher who had access to them before they were removed has since described the nature of the extra 11 seconds to colleagues. Inside those seconds, she said, the data showed that the submersible was not alone. Something else had been recorded, not on the camera, on the pressure sensors. A second presence in the water column at depth of mass and dimension that no instrument was designed to measure. It had been there for those 11 seconds. And then it had not been there. And whatever it was, she said, had been the one that decided the conversation was over. The diver who entered the trench near the Sangihe Arc and surfaced, changed, had been down for what the surface records showed as 67 minutes. The capsule was intact. He was breathing. He was awake. His hair was grey where it had been dark. The skin of his face carried the specific weathering of years. Calcium deposits in his bones that had not been there at the start of the dive were confirmed by portside radiology within hours. Cellular aging markers beyond his baseline. Scar tissue in places where he had no history of injury. He had aged physically, measurably, irrefutably. He did not speak for 2 days. When he finally asked for a pen, he filled 1 page. Spirals within spirals, what appeared to be time notation, coordinates, and 1 phrase repeated down the margin in handwriting that had changed was smaller and more careful than his handwriting before the dive. It watches forward. It remembers backward. He has not returned to the water. His capsule is in a laboratory. Its interior walls carry light scoring, not instrument damage, not mechanical wear. The scoring follows no tool path. It follows a pattern. People who have sat quietly in the dark beside the capsule have reported afterward a sound, faint, rhythmic, emanating from within the sealed metal. Not mechanical, biological, like someone still breathing, somewhere deeper than the capsule can contain. The algae formation in the shallows off Japan's Ryukyu Islands covered approximately 2 kilometers of seafloor in a design so precise that a structural engineer who reviewed the drone footage spent 45 minutes believing it was a digitally altered image before accepting that it was real. Straight avenues, cross-sections at regular intervals, concentric arcs, a circular hub at the center where the growth was denser and pulsed visibly in the sunlight. The algae was native, ordinary, nothing unusual in its genetic profile. What was unusual was that it had grown in the shape of a city, not randomly, not in approximate patterns, but in the specific way of something that knows what a city is and has chosen to represent it. When a diver hovered above the ring at the center, her instruments began to loop, depth readings fluctuating, coordinates cycling, sound levels spiking in rhythms too clean to be random. In the lab, samples of the algae placed in tanks began, within days, to sketch new lines on any available surface, glass, metal, stone. Not reproducing, continuing, drawing more of the same city, extending its boundaries into whatever space was available, as if the design were not yet finished, as if the city had more to say. One biologist, watching a sample draw a new arc on the glass wall of a tank at 2 a.m., called a colleague and said quietly, "I think the algae wants to be remembered. I think whatever it is, drawing was real once. And I think it is trying to show us where it was." In the fracture zone near the Galapagos, a ruin, rectangular, 20 meters long. Stone not entirely stone, something smoother beneath the mineral accretion, something that absorbed light rather than reflecting it. Carved across every surface were symbols that repeated at precise intervals. Not letters, not pictograms, geometric forms that a mathematician on the team identified as encoding information but could not decode. The ruin had no entrance. Its walls were unbroken on all 4 sides, on the roof, at the base, not sealed, simply never opened, as though it had been built closed from the outside in by something that did not need to enter because the point was not the inside but the outside. The message on the surface, the symbols repeating their information to an empty sea. For however many years, the ruin had been sitting on this ridge. A pressure sensor near the ruin registered a resonance in the walls, a vibration just beyond frequency, as if the symbols were not carved but tuned, as if the structure were an instrument playing a note that only the deep ocean's pressure could produce. The team surfaced to prepare for a return dive. When they descended again 2 days later, the ridge face was bare, not collapsed, not buried. The ruin had simply gone, leaving only the symbols, etched now into the memory of the recording equipment, faint as echoes, not on rock, but in the light itself. There is a whale song that changed in 2019, not gradually, overnight. Pods in the southern Chatham Rise that had been singing the same regional dialect for years began incorporating a new phrase: 3 rising tones, pause, 2 falling, 1 sustained. The phrase was not from any known whale population. It had not spread from another pod. It appeared simultaneously in multiple pods across a wide area, as if something had broadcast it and the whales had heard it and taken it in. The source of the phrase was eventually traced by hydrophone array to a location in the open ocean with no vessel traffic, no geological activity, no known biological presence. The signal at that location had been transmitting for an unknown duration at a frequency just below the range of standard monitoring equipment, which is why it had not been previously detected. It pulsed every 29 seconds. It had syntax. Linguists identified structure, rising tones, pause, falling, held, a phrase, not a noise, a statement, not a signal. When a hydrophone was placed near the source coordinates, the diver who placed it reported on surfacing that the silence near the source was dense, not just quiet, dense, as if the water there had another quality, a thickness, a presence. The signal stopped after 13 days. The whales continue to sing the borrowed phrase, pod to pod, basin to basin, as if passing on a message they received but do not fully understand, as if keeping it alive until someone can explain what it means. The wave off Vancouver Island had no wind behind it, no seismic event below it, no current or tidal pattern to account for its height or its direction. It rose from flat water 4 meters tall and moved with the specific grace of something that had decided where it was going. The 2 researchers on the catamaran watched it approach and reported later that it changed course slightly to pass beside them rather than through them, a maneuver that required either extraordinary coincidence or something that does not fit neatly into the physics of fluid dynamics. After it passed, the air thickened. One researcher reported a charge in the atmosphere that had no meteorological source. The other saw, in the wake of the wave, colors in the water, amber, then indigo, brief flashes that might have been bioluminescence, or might have been something below the surface reflecting light from a source beneath it. The wave left no radar trace. The sonar log showed nothing. Satellite imagery of the area in that hour showed a flat ocean surface. The only record is the footage from the catamaran's cameras, which caught, in slow review, the crest of the wave shimmering with those impossible colors and casting in the flat grey morning a shadow that fell in the wrong direction for the angle of the light. The ocean has waves that belong to no weather system. It has bells that belong to no instrument. It has maps of a world before the ice retreated. It has something in the rock of the Kermadec Trench that breathes. It is enormous and ancient and almost entirely unexamined. And tonight, wherever you are sleeping on the surface of it. Deep beneath the surface of the Labrador Sea, where icebergs carve and cold water sinks in one of the ocean's great overturning circulation events, instruments deployed to monitor deep water formation began returning a signal in 2017 that had no source in any oceanographic process. A warmth. Not a thermal vent. There are no thermal vents in this basin. Not geothermal leakage. The seafloor geology does not support it. A warmth that moved, that had direction, that maintained a consistent temperature differential of approximately 2 degrees above ambient as it drifted through the frigid Labrador Basin like something alive running a fever. It was tracked for 11 days before it disappeared. It returned the following year in the same season, and the year after, each appearance lasting between 9 and 14 days. The warmth carries no chemical signature, no biological indicator, no radioactive trace. It is simply warm in a place that should not be warm, returning each year like something that has somewhere else to be the rest of the time and passes through this basin on its way from one unknown place to another. the underwater cave system off the coast of the Yucatan Peninsula, the Sistema Sac Actun, the longest known underwater cave system in the world, has been mapped for decades. Its passages extend for hundreds of kilometers under the Yucatan shelf, and they contain extraordinary archaeological evidence of Mayan use and pre-Mayan human presence going back more than 15,000 years. But in 2021, a survey team mapping a previously unexplored branch of the system reached a chamber that was not on any existing map, and that should not, by the structural geology of the region, have existed at all. The chamber was vast, estimated at over 200 meters across, with a ceiling of bioluminescent mineral formation that lit the space in a pale, diffuse, blue-white light. At the center of the chamber was a stone formation that every member of the team independently described in their separate accounts as a seat. It was not a natural formation. It had been worked. It was sized for something larger than a human being. On the floor around it, in the ancient sediment that records every contact made with its surface, there were impressions, not footprints, too large and too few pointed for footprints. Something had been in that chamber, something had sat in that seat, something had been there long enough that the sediment remembered it. The team mapped the chamber and surfaced and submitted their report. The branch of the cave system leading to the chamber cannot currently be relocated. The passages that led them there have not been found again. The listening stone on the floor of the Coral Sea had been reported by fishermen for generations. A rock, they said, that hummed, that you could feel vibrating if you put your hand near it, that sometimes made the water above it ripple in perfectly concentric circles when the sea was otherwise flat. A survey team eventually dove to the coordinates and found it, a basalt formation approximately 4 meters across and 1 meter high, unremarkable in appearance, featureless, no different visually from the hundreds of other volcanic stones scattered across that section of reef, except that it vibrated at a frequency of 18.8 Hz, just below the lower threshold of human hearing, in the range that research has associated with the sensation of unease, with peripheral visual disturbances, with the feeling of a presence that cannot be identified. The vibration had no geological source. The stone was not connected to any fault line. It was not sitting over a thermal feature. It was simply vibrating, as if tuned, as if maintaining a note. Diver, who rested his hand near it for 30 seconds, reported that he subsequently, for 3 nights, dreamed of water, not of being underwater, just of water, vast and dark, and a sense within that water of something that knew exactly how large it was and was entirely comfortable with that knowledge. The stone is still there, it is still vibrating. Nobody has explained why. The signal recorded in the Mariana Trench in 2019 was described by the team who received it as a reply. They had not sent anything. They had been operating passive hydrophones in a standard survey configuration when, at 3:47 in the morning of the 11th day, the hydrophones received a pulse that the lead analyst recognized immediately as structured. It had the characteristics of intentional signal, the kind produced by sonar in active mode. But the team was in passive mode. No vessel in range was pinging. When the team analyzed the frequency and the waveform, they found that it matched, almost exactly, the passive reception frequency of their own hydrophone array. As if something below had listened to their instruments for 10 days, learned the frequency at which those instruments were most sensitive, and then used that frequency to send something back. What was sent was not decipherable as information, but it was structured. It had beginning, middle, and end. It had what one analyst called intentionality in its shape. The team published a cautious paper describing the event as an anomalous acoustic signature of unknown origin. In the margins of the paper's draft, before it was submitted for peer review, someone had written in pencil. It said, "Hello." The pencil note was removed before publication. The anomalous acoustic signature remains unexplained. The compass roses carved into the bedrock at the bottom of the Caribbean Sea, near Turks and Caicos Islands, were found in 2015 at a depth of 120 meters, not painted, not embedded, carved into the stone of the seafloor itself with a precision and a consistency that a marine archaeologist estimated would have taken weeks of skilled work to produce. 16 of them, arranged in a rough grid, each one pointing to a slightly different north, not magnetic north, not true north, but directions that nobody on the survey team could identify as any cardinal system in current use. They were old. The stone around them bore the growth patterns of centuries of biological activity. The carvings themselves were older than that growth. One of the archaeologists, drawing the arrangement to scale on paper aboard the survey vessel, realized that the 16 different norths, if extended as lines across a chart of the region, all converged on a single point in open ocean approximately 340 kilometers to the southwest. The team dispatched a vessel to that point. The seabed there, at 800 meters, showed a depression in the sediment, circular, clean-edged, 22 meters across, with no debris, no geological feature, no explanation for its existence. As if something had sat there for a very long time and then lifted away, leaving only the impression of its weight in the soft floor of the sea. The bioluminescent display in the Indian Ocean off the coast of Sri Lanka that occurred in March 2020 covered approximately 40 square kilometers of ocean surface and was visible from aircraft at cruising altitude as a steady blue-white glow that pilots initially reported as an oil slick on fire. It was not an oil slick. It was not on fire. The glow pulsed, not randomly, but in expanding rings radiating from a central point, each ring taking approximately 40 seconds to travel from the center to the edge of the display, each ring slightly brighter than the last. This pattern continued for 6 hours. The center point was precisely 4.7 kilometers from a location that NOAA records identify as the site where, in 1997, a hydrophone array recorded what was temporarily the loudest biological sound ever measured in the ocean. A call from an unknown source later named the bloop, subsequently attributed to icequake activity, but never fully explained to the satisfaction of everyone who studied it. The 2020 bioluminescent display was analyzed by Sri Lankan and international teams. The organisms producing it were a standard dinoflagellate population found throughout the Indian Ocean. The pattern they produced was not standard. Dinoflagellates do not pulse in expanding rings from a center. Dinoflagellates respond to mechanical disturbance. Something in the water was disturbing them in a specific pattern, something moving outward from that central point in rings, touching the water at precise intervals, producing the light. No instrument detected what it was. The Antikythera mechanism was recovered from a Roman-era shipwreck off the Greek island of Antikythera in 1901. It is, famously, an analog computer built approximately 2,000 years ago, a geared astronomical calculator of such sophistication that it predates the next known comparable mechanism by more than 1,000 years. What is less discussed is what was found in the same wreck in 2016 by a team using updated underwater archaeology techniques: a bronze hand. A single human hand, molded in extraordinary anatomical detail. Its surface worked with the same precision as the Antikythera mechanism itself, its interior examined by X-ray, containing a series of small channels that nobody has satisfactorily explained. The channels follow the paths of the hand's tendons. They are the right diameter to carry fluid. They connect to nothing because the rest of what they connected to was not recovered. Whatever the hand was part of, it was not decorative. It was functional. It was designed to move or to feel or to do something that a hand does in a context that nobody has been able to reconstruct from a bronze casting and a set of internal channels and 2,000 years of silence on the floor of the Aegean. The thing at the bottom of the Sirena Deep, the second deepest point in the Mariana Trench, deeper than the Challenger Deep at 10,809 meters, was detected not by camera, but by the behavior of the instruments that passed over it. A survey submersible making a transit of the Sirena Deep in 2016 noted a consistent pattern. At one specific location along the traverse, every sensitive instrument on the vehicle registered a brief period of elevated response, not malfunction. Response, as if the instruments were receiving more input than usual, as if the field they were designed to measure was stronger at that point. The point was 47 meters across. Every pass over those same coordinates produced the same elevated response. The submersible's cameras showed nothing. Flat sediment, the usual abyssal landscape. But the instruments insisted there was something there, something generating a field or a presence that every sensitive measuring device on the vehicle responded to and that no camera could see. Subsequent passes with different vehicle configurations confirmed the same result. Whatever is at that point in the Sirena Deep is invisible to light and detectable only by sensitivity. It is 47 meters across. It is still there. It has not moved. The boat that anchored in the same coordinates for 11 years was a mystery because there was no boat. There was an anchor, a modern anchor of the Danforth type used by recreational vessels, sitting on the seafloor at 35 meters depth off the coast of Malta, in perfect condition, chain trailing northeast toward the surface, and then, at approximately 20 meters depth, ending cleanly. Not frayed, not corroded, ending. The surface above the anchor was empty water. Every year for 11 years, the anchor was there. Every year its chain ended at exactly 20 meters in open water. Divers checked the chain's end. The last link showed no sign of stress fracture, no wear pattern consistent with separation by any mechanical means. The chain had not snapped, it had not been cut. It simply ended as if the boat above it had gradually ceased to exist from the surface downward, and the process had stopped for some reason at 20 meters, leaving the lower section behind. On the 12th year, the anchor was gone. The seafloor at those coordinates bore, in the sediment, the impression of an anchor's flukes and the drag pattern of a chain, fresh, as if someone had just lifted it. There is no record of any salvage operation at those coordinates. There is no record of any vessel anchoring there. The deep-sea mirror spotted by a survey submersible in the abyssal plains near the Maldives at approximately 3,000 meters was photographed and then not photographed again because the camera system malfunctioned on the second pass. The first photographs showed a reflective surface approximately 8 meters across, lying flat on the sediment, too regular and too smooth to be a natural formation, and too large and too deep to have arrived by any mechanism the team could account for. It reflected the submersible's lights with a clarity that suggested the surface was intact and clean, not fouled by the centuries of biological growth that claims everything else on the abyssal plane eventually. It was not glass. Sonar showed it to be of a material denser than anything in the standard geological survey catalogue. When the camera malfunctioned on the second pass, the team attempted to collect a sample with the robotic arm. The arm passed through the surface as if through water, without resistance, and came up with nothing. Not because the material was too hard, because it did not interact with the arm at all. The arm had passed through something that behaved as if it were not physical. The mirror is in the photographs, undeniable, clearly present. It is not physical. It remains, and has remained, for however long it has been there, a reflection of a depth that has nothing above it to reflect. The sound nicknamed the whistle was recorded by hydrophones in the Weddell Sea in 2014 and 2015. It was a clean, ascending tone, lasting approximately 3 seconds, repeating at intervals of between 7 and 12 minutes. Not regular enough to be mechanical, not irregular enough to be geological. The frequency shifted slightly with each repetition, as if the source were warming up, as if each whistle were a degree or two higher in pitch than the last, and the sequence were building towards something. In 14 months of recording, the whistle rose approximately 2 full tones in pitch. Extrapolating the rate of rise, a researcher calculated that the sequence would reach the upper limit of the hydrophone's recording range in approximately 8 years from the first recording, at which point it would become inaudible to the instruments. He called this finding in his notes the question of whether the whistle has been rising towards something or has been rising away from something, whether the sequence is a build or a departure. The whistle has not been explained. It does not match any known biological, geological, or mechanical source. It continues to rise. In the years since those recordings, other research teams in other parts of the Southern Ocean have reported what may be the same sound, the same 3-second tone, the same rising sequence, suggesting either that the whistle has moved or that there is more than one. At the deepest point of the Pacific, the Challenger Deep, the first human visit in 1960 produced an observation that has never been satisfactorily resolved. Lieutenant Don Walsh and Jacques Picard, descending in the Bathyscaphe Trieste, reported seeing a flatfish on the seafloor at nearly 11 kilometers depth, under pressure of approximately 1,000 atmospheres, in conditions that for decades afterward scientists insisted made vertebrate life biologically impossible. The fish has been contested ever since. Walsh himself maintained he saw it. Oceanographers have argued it was a sea cucumber, misidentified in the stress of the moment. But in 2012, the first manned return to the Challenger Deep by filmmaker James Cameron recorded in the footage of his dive a shrimp-like organism at full depth. And in 2019, a scientific expedition found, in sediment samples from the Challenger Deep, high concentrations of PCBs, industrial pollutants, from human manufacturing, at levels exceeding those found in crustaceans from much shallower contaminated river systems. The deepest point on Earth is more polluted than rivers running through industrial cities. Something is carrying material from the surface to the absolute bottom of the ocean with an efficiency that our circulation models do not fully account for. The deep is not separate from us. We have been down there in our chemicals, if not in our presence, for longer than we have been able to reach it. The thermal anomaly in the Weddell Sea that NASA ice scientists began tracking in 2016 was a circle, a perfect open water circle in the Antarctic sea ice, approximately 80 kilometers across, that appeared in late autumn when the surrounding sea should have been freezing and should have continued to freeze. The Weddell Polynya, as oceanographers call it, has appeared before. It was recorded in the 1970s and then did not appear for over 40 years. Its return was attributed by most scientists to changes in deep-water circulation, but the 2016 appearance and those that followed were different in one particular that the original 1970s event did not share. The circle was not simply open water. The open water was warm, not slightly above ambient, warm enough that satellite thermal imaging showed it as a distinct heat signature rising from the surface of the Antarctic ice sheet. Something below that circle was warming the water from beneath with a consistency and a precision, a circle, not an irregular melt pattern, a circle that made the explanation of changed circulation patterns harder to maintain with each subsequent year's observation. Something below the Weddell Sea warms that circle. Something below the Weddell Sea has been warming it, on and off, for at least 50 years. It makes a circle because the source is a point of heat. A point that, when it is active, produces open water in a frozen sea, and that has no adequate geological explanation. The pilot who surfaced from a routine test dive off the coast of Chile emerged from the submersible and sat at the foot of the ladder for 40 minutes before she would accept assistance. When she finally spoke, she described the dive, which her instruments recorded as nominal, 230 meters, 42 minutes, all systems functional, as having lasted approximately 3 days. Not as a disorientation, not as a hallucination, as an experience. She had been somewhere for 3 days. She had had experiences she could not describe in terms that mapped to physical reality. She had spoken to... She stopped herself. She had perceived something that had responded. When she was finally persuaded to submit to medical examination, her hair had grown 3 millimeters, more than was consistent with 42 minutes. Her nails had grown. Her body showed the physiological signs of mild dehydration and mild hunger that would be consistent with approximately 60 to 72 hours without food or water. The submersible's instruments showed 42 minutes. Her body showed 3 days. The footage from the external cameras was intact, nominal, 42 minutes of dark water and nothing unusual. The footage from the internal camera, the one pointed at the pilot seat, was blank. Not corrupted. Blank. As if nothing had been in the pilot seat for 42 minutes, as if whatever had been in that submersible for 3 days was something. The internal camera had no way to record. There is a location in the North Atlantic. The coordinates are not publicly listed, but are known to a small number of oceanographers at 3 institutions, where the ocean floor has been rising, not in the geological sense of tectonic uplift, which would be measured in millimeters across centuries, rising in the sense of a feature on the seafloor that is measurably closer to the surface each time it is surveyed. The feature was first mapped in 2003 at 2,400 meters depth. By 2010, it was at 2,350 meters. By 2018, it was at 2,290 meters. At that rate of change, it will reach 1,000 meters depth in approximately 130 years. At 1,000 meters, it becomes accessible to recreational deep submersible technology. At 200 meters, it becomes accessible to sport divers. At 0 meters, it becomes visible. The feature is described in the survey data as a smooth dome of unknown composition, approximately 400 meters across, showing no volcanic or geological activity that would account for its rise. It is simply coming up, slowly, without apparent hurry, as if it knows how much time it has and has decided that time is not a reason to rush. The fish that the crew of the MV Northland photographed off the Lofton Islands in December 2021 does not match any described species. It was large. They estimated 6 meters from what was visible, but it was only partially at the surface, and the body below the waterline extended further than they could see. Its skin was translucent in a way that allowed the internal organs to be faintly visible as shadows, and several crew members noted that those shadows were moving in a way that suggested bilateral symmetry, unusual for fish, as if the organism had 2 sets of organs arranged in parallel rather than the single vertebrate body plan. One crew member photographed it from the deck. The photograph shows clearly an organism at the surface that is not in any field guide, is not in any taxonomy, does not match any creature any ichthyologist who reviewed the image could identify. The organism spent approximately 90 seconds at the surface and then descended without visible motion, not diving, not swimming away, simply descending, the surface of the water closing over it without disturbance, as if the ocean had simply decided to take it back. The photograph is real, the organism is real, the taxonomy has no place for it. What it was doing at the surface, what it was looking at during those 90 seconds, whether it noticed the ship above it, none of these things can be known from a photograph at 90 seconds, but it was there, and it is down there still. The radio signal received on Channel 9, the maritime distress frequency, by a fishing vessel off the Nova Scotia coast in 2018 lasted for 4 minutes and 13 seconds and contained no voice, no Morse, no standard distress format. It contained a sound that the vessel's captain, a man with 30 years of maritime experience, described as language he did not know and had never heard. Not a foreign language he failed to recognize. Not a language at all in the conventional sense. A sound that had the architecture of language, the rhythm, the cadence, the specific way that articulate communication rises and falls and pauses and continues, without any of the phonemes that human languages use to carry meaning, as if language itself, the structural principle of it, had been separated from all human content and transmitted on its own. He recorded it. The recording has been analyzed by linguists, by cryptographers, by people who study whale song and dolphin communication and the vocalizations of every marine mammal known to science. None of them have produced an explanation. What they agree on is this: it is not random, it is not noise. Whatever it is trying to say something. Channel 9 exists because the sea needs a frequency reserved for emergencies. Whatever was transmitting that night had found the frequency. Whether it understood what the frequency was for is a question that remains quietly open. The wreck of the SS Orang Medan, reported sunk in the Strait of Malacca in the late 1940s, may not exist. The vessel does not appear in Lloyd's Register of Shipping or in any surviving Dutch colonial maritime records, though the area was under Dutch administration at the time. And yet the story of the Orang Medan appears consistently in maritime distress records from 1947, accounts of a vessel transmitting a distress signal in Morse code, a signal that read, "After the routine SOS, all officers including captain are dead, lying in chart room and on bridge, probably whole crew dead. Then one final fragment, I die." A rescue vessel reportedly reached the coordinates, found the Orang Medan with all crew dead, expressions of terror on their faces, no sign of injury, no sign of any cause of death, and then, before the dead could be recovered, the vessel caught fire from an unknown source in the cargo hold and sank before it could be boarded. No wreck has been found. No record confirms the vessel's existence. The story has been investigated for 70 years, and the verdict of most researchers is that it is probably a fabrication, but the distress signal appears in two independent maritime records. The distress signal is documented. Whatever sent it, whatever was dying at the other end of that transmission, was real enough to transmit. Whether the vessel that carried whatever died is real is a different question from whether the dying was real. The dome in the bay at Chiloé Island in southern Chile was found in 2010 at 10 meters depth, half buried in silt, 12 meters across and 4 meters high, seamless and warm. No barnacles, no life on its surface. A pulse. One long, two short, then stillness. That changed when the survey drone made contact. The warmth it emitted was not heat in the thermal sense. Instruments detected no infrared signature, no temperature differential with the surrounding water. The warmth was perceived only by divers who came close, as subjective sensation, each diver separately reporting it, each using words like presence or inhabited or the feeling of standing next to something that is paying attention. The sonar reads of its interior were inconsistent, solid on one pass, hollow on the next, as if the interior of the dome were not a fixed physical state, but a variable one. When a drone passed directly overhead, the camera feed showed something that appeared only in that specific angle. The water above the dome was bent, as if the bay itself had become a lens, stretching and curving light through the water column. And in that brief, bent light, for the fraction of a second that the angle held, shapes were visible through the surface of the dome. Not internal structures, not mechanical components, but the shapes of a place. A room. Rooms. An interior that was not 12 meters across. The fishermen who know this bay call it the sleeping dome. The water above it never ripples, even when the wind blows, even when everything else in the bay moves. The chain-mail coral of the South Pacific, found on a ridge at approximately 200 meters depth north of Tonga, grew in perfect interlocking rings, link through link, with a physical geometry that coral does not produce and cannot produce through any biological mechanism available to it. Each link was approximately 8 centimeters across. The links connected to each other with the same interlocking precision as forged chain. Under a microscope, the junctions between links showed no gap, no seam. They had not been attached. They had grown through each other, which requires either that the laws governing the biological growth of calcium carbonate had been suspended in this particular colony, or that the colony had somehow been guided, each polyp, over the years of the reef's construction, placing its calcium in the precise location required to form the next section of the next link in an ongoing chain. A diver who touched the reef reported a vibration through their gloves. Not movement, a tone, just audible, just perceptible. The chain continued for approximately 40 meters before the ridge dropped into deeper water. At the drop, the chain ended. The final link sat at the edge, intact, not broken, placed at the boundary between the shallow ridge and the deep water as deliberately as a full stop at the end of a sentence. The chain had been making something. Whatever it was making was finished. Whatever it was leading toward was below. The thing that lived in the thermocline east of the Bahamas was observed by 17 separate researchers over 4 years before anyone wrote a formal report on it, because everyone who saw it assumed, initially, that they had seen something that could be explained and then discovered, on reflection, that they had not. It appeared at the thermocline boundary at the specific depth where warm surface water met cold, deep water, as a distortion, a shimmering, a displacement of the density layer that was clearly caused by something moving through it. The distortion was large. Estimates ranged from 60 to over 200 meters in the dimension perpendicular to the thermocline. It moved slowly with deliberation, occasionally pausing for periods of hours. It was not a current anomaly. It was not a thermal gradient event. Every researcher who encountered it described the same sensation in the water around it, a change in quality, a thickness, a something has been here feeling that persisted in the water for hours after the distortion moved on. One researcher who had been in the water during a close encounter gave the most precise description in her report. She wrote, "It was not hiding. It knew we were here. It had always known. It moved through the thermocline the way you move through a house in the dark. Because you have lived there so long, you no longer need to see where the walls are." The singing rock formation at the entrance to the Strait of Juan de Fuca was known to the Makah people of the Pacific Northwest long before any Western Marine Survey reached those waters. They called it, in their own language, by a name that translates approximately as the stone that speaks to the water. It is a basalt formation at approximately 40 meters depth, roughly 4 meters tall, projecting from a rocky shelf near a deep water channel. When the current through the channel reaches a certain speed, approximately 1.4 meters per second, which occurs during specific tidal phases, the stone sings. Not metaphorically, it produces a tone, a sustained, complex, harmonically rich tone that has been recorded by hydrophones and analyzed by acoustic engineers who confirm that the formation is functioning as a Helmholtz resonator, the same principle that makes a bottle whistle when you blow across its mouth. The geometry of the formation, the specific hollow at its base, the angle of its leading face to the current, produces a note of extraordinary consistency each time the tidal conditions are right. The note is F-sharp below middle C. It has been sounding that note at those tidal phases since before any living person. The Makah elders say it has been sounding since before their oral history begins, a stone in the sea placed there by geology, shaped by erosion, and accidentally or not accidentally, turned by the specific configuration of its form into an instrument that the tides play. That is the natural explanation. The thing that has not been explained is why, on certain recordings, the note changes, not from session to session, during a session, as if the stone is not just resonating but varying its tone, the way a singer varies pitch, as if something is choosing the note rather than simply producing it. The acoustic survey of the Coral Triangle in 2018 produced, among its thousands of hours of hydrophone recording, 42 seconds that the lead researcher has never published and has discussed publicly only once. The 42 seconds contain, she said at a conference in 2022, what appears to be a response. Her team had been using a low-frequency pinger to calibrate their equipment, a standard ping, 1 per minute, 220 Hz. On the 43rd minute, something pinged back, not at 220 Hz, at a frequency that the instruments measured as variable, shifting as if it were not a fixed frequency signal, but a modulated one, the kind of modulation associated with intentional communication rather than mechanical echo. The return signal lasted 42 seconds. When the team analyzed its structure, they found that it began with 3 pulses at 220 Hz, an echo of their own signal, and then shifted into something else, something longer and more complex, something that had more information in it than a simple echo has any reason to contain. She described its structure as grammatical. She said it had a beginning, and then it had a middle where something was being said, and then it had an end. She has not published it because she does not know what to say about it. She is not a person who speaks carelessly about what she finds in the ocean. She is someone who has spent 20 years listening carefully to everything the ocean says. And for 42 seconds she heard it say something back. There is a wreck in the Bismarck Sea that locals on the island of New Britain have known about for generations, a place in the water they avoid, a place where the fishing is bad and the birds do not fly, and the water has a quality they describe not as dangerous, but as occupied. An archaeological survey in 2016 finally sent divers to the coordinates. What they found at approximately 180 meters depth was a vessel, old, wooden-framed, heavily encrusted, that matched no colonial or pre-colonial ship type in the maritime records of the Pacific. The construction techniques suggested considerable age. The timbers had been shaped with tools that left marks inconsistent with any metal implement in standard use at any documented period of Pacific maritime history. But more than the vessel itself, what the divers found was the cargo. The hold was filled with stones, hundreds of them, each one roughly the size of a human head, each one smooth, not smoothed by water or erosion, but shaped, deliberately rounded, with a consistency of form that suggested they had all been produced to a specification. Under examination, each stone bore on its surface a faint scoring, lines precise, identical on every stone. The scoring formed the same pattern on every one, a pattern that one of the survey archaeologists recognized with genuine astonishment as matching the specific angular configuration of the Pleiades star cluster as visible from the southern hemisphere in approximately 1200 AD. Hundreds of identical stones, each marked with the same star map on a ship that should not exist, carrying cargo that should not have been made in waters that have been avoided by the people who live beside them for as long as anyone can remember. The Jemchug Canyon in the Bering Sea is the deepest submarine canyon in the world, deeper than the Grand Canyon, wider and largely unexplored. The few survey expeditions that have descended into its deeper sections have returned with data that is, in the language of scientific reporting, anomalous. Current patterns that flow in directions they should not flow, temperature readings that invert the expected thermal profile, a sound environment that is at depths below 2,000 meters in the canyon, significantly quieter than it should be. Not quiet in the way of the ordinary deep sea, but quiet in a specific, bounded way, as if the canyon below a certain depth is acoustically sealed, as if sound does not leave that space. The most recent survey in 2020 included an experiment. A standard acoustic pinger was deployed at 1/800 meters, and its signal was tracked by hydrophones placed throughout the canyon. At 1/800 meters, the signal was clear. As the pinger descended further, the signal weakened normally. At approximately 2,300 meters, the signal vanished, not weakened beyond detection. Vanished. The pinger was still transmitting. Its own internal logs confirmed continuous operation throughout the descent. But the sound was not in the water. The sound was going somewhere else. The pinger was recovered. It showed no damage. Its logs showed continuous operation. Its memory contained the full record of a descent into a space where its sound had not propagated. Where it had gone instead has not been determined. The night camera on a deep-sea platform off the coast of Portugal, positioned at 600 meters depth for long-term observation of benthic activity, captured over 14 months of footage that was largely routine. Then, on the 278th day of deployment at 02:17 local time, the camera recorded something moving along the sea floor below the platform's lights. It was large enough that when it passed through the lit zone, it was partially out of frame at both edges simultaneously. The lit zone was 12 meters across. It moved slowly in the specific unhurried way of something that is not concerned about being observed. It was not a whale. It was not any cetacean. The movement was not right. The silhouette was not right. It had no visible fins, no visible tail, no visible surface features of any kind. It passed through the lit zone in approximately 40 seconds and disappeared into the dark. The team reviewed the footage. They reviewed it again. The shape they saw was not consistent with any species in any marine taxonomy they could access. What it was consistent with, and this was noted in the team's internal correspondence but not in any public report, was a body plan that did not appear in the fossil record until approximately 350 million years ago, and that disappeared from the fossil record approximately 66 million years ago. What they saw for 40 seconds in 12 meters of light at the bottom of the Atlantic had the silhouette of something that by every account of the natural history of this planet should not be here anymore. The message in the sand near the Azores was found by a diver doing a routine buoyancy check at 30 meters depth. In the soft sand of the seafloor, someone or something had written letters. Clear, formed, deliberate, not scoured by current, not scraped by an anchor. 3 letters, approximately 1 meter tall each. Ask. The diver surfaced and reported it. 2 other divers descended with cameras. Ask was still there. The cameras recorded it. The divers searched the surrounding area for any evidence of who had written it. No footprints in the sand, no tool marks, no propeller wash, no disturbance anywhere around the letters except the letters themselves. The letters remained for 4 days, checked each morning, intact each time. On the 5th day, they were gone. Not scoured by current, the surrounding sand was undisturbed, simply gone. The team discussed at length what ASK might mean, a command, an abbreviation, a fragment of something longer. The discussion was never formally documented because the team's supervisor, who had not dived to see the letters himself and had only seen the photographs, said it was obviously a prank. But the team members who saw it know it was not a prank because the letters were written in a hand, a recognizable calligraphic style, and the hand was not human. The proportion of the strokes, the specific way the letters were formed was correct for a human script but incorrect for a human hand. Something that understood human letters but did not have human hands had written them. And it had written one word, Ask. The pressure anomaly recorded by a network of ocean bottom seismometers in the Southern Ocean in November 2021 was not seismic. It was a pressure wave, not vibration, not shear, but a direct displacement of the water column, a push, clean and spherical, emanating from a point at approximately 14,800 meters depth and propagating outward through the ocean at a velocity slightly lower than the speed of sound in seawater. The instruments at the edges of the network caught it 12 minutes after the instruments at the center. Working backwards, the team calculated the origin point. It was in the middle of the abyssal plain, no ridge, no seamount, no known geological feature. And it was large. The energy of the pressure wave, calculated from the instrument readings, was roughly equivalent to a large earthquake. But there was no earthquake. There was no volcanic event. There was no submarine landslide. There was a pressure wave, spherical and expanding, from a point in the middle of the ocean floor where nothing geological should have been able to produce one. The wave was not harmful. It propagated through the ocean and dissipated without affecting anything at the surface. But it was there. Something at 4,800 meters in the southern abyssal plain displaced the water column in every direction simultaneously with the energy of a major seismic event and left no geological trace. The seismologists filed the data under unexplained anomalous pressure event. In the margin of the data sheet, one of them wrote in pencil and then crossed out, "It moved." The abandoned lighthouse on Surtsey, the volcanic island that rose from the sea off Iceland in 1963 and has been a protected scientific reserve ever since, accessible only to researchers, does not exist. There is no lighthouse on Surtsey. There has never been a lighthouse on Surtsey. The island is visited by a small number of researchers each year and is otherwise uninhabited. And yet, in 2019, a supply vessel approaching Surtsey from the south to deliver research equipment photographed, clearly visible on the island's northwestern coast, a lighthouse. White tower, lamp room at the top, the specific architecture of a late 19th century North Atlantic lighthouse. The photograph was taken at 1423. A second photograph taken at 1431 showed empty coastline. The island's resident researchers, contacted immediately, reported that no lighthouse had been visible from their position. No lighthouse exists, has ever been constructed, and the geology of the northwestern coast does not include any formation that could be mistaken for a lighthouse at that angle and distance. The photograph is real. The lighthouse is in it. Where it came from, why it was visible for approximately 8 minutes, and where it went are questions that have no answer. The supply vessel's captain filed the photograph in the ship's log without comment except a timestamp. He has not discussed it publicly. He did not go back to look. The object found lodged in the teeth of a robotic claw after a survey operation near the Philippine Trench in 2022 was smaller than a golf ball and heavier than it should have been for its size. The claw had been operating near the trench wall at approximately 7,000 meters depth, collecting sediment samples, and the object was not in any sediment sample. It was in the teeth of the claw when the claw arrived at the surface, as if it had been placed there, deliberately, while the arm was working. The object was smooth, not smooth the way a riverstone is smooth, smooth the way something is smooth when it has been manufactured to a tolerance that precludes surface variation. Its surface was uniformly dark, a color that sat between black and the darkest gray that photography can distinguish, and it did not reflect light from any angle. Instruments aboard the survey vessel could not determine its composition. X-ray passed through it without returning an image. Magnetic fields did not affect it, and it did not affect magnetic fields. It had a weight of 340 grams in air, and in water its apparent weight was exactly the same. It displaced water without the water exerting buoyancy, a physical characteristic that should not exist. It was placed in a secure container, transported to a research facility, and 2 days later was no longer in the container. The container showed no breach, no sign of mechanical opening. The object had simply ceased to be in it. 3 weeks after its disappearance, the team's lead scientist found it on his desk one morning. He placed it back in the container. The next morning it was on his desk again. He left it there. He does not know where it goes at night. He does not know what it is doing when it is not on his desk. The fishermen of the Faroe Islands have a tradition, not widely known outside those islands, of hanging a dried cod over the doorway of a new boat before its first launch. The tradition is very old and its origin is not clearly documented, but the reason given by those who still practice it is consistent. It keeps the boat from being noticed, not from being seen by other ships or by customs officials or by anyone human, from being noticed by whatever it is that the North Atlantic notices when something new enters it. The tradition implies a belief, old enough to have become custom, that the ocean is paying attention, that it catalogues arrivals, that a new vessel in familiar waters is registered somewhere by something, and that the dried cod is a marker of continuity. This vessel belongs to a family that has been in these waters for generations. This is not a new intrusion. This is a continuation. Whether this belief is literally true in any physical sense is not a question that oceanography can address. What it represents is the accumulated observation of hundreds of years of people who spent their entire lives at sea in the North Atlantic, people who watched the ocean more closely and more continuously than any researcher with a hydrophone array ever has. They noticed something. They codified what they noticed into practice. Whatever they noticed was real enough that the practice has persisted across centuries. The ocean pays attention. It notices new things it has always noticed, and the people who knew it best built that knowledge into the way they treated the boats they put into it. The deepest biological community ever recorded, found in 2020 at 836 meters depth in the Izu-Ogasawara Trench, was not supposed to be there. Nothing was supposed to be there. The pressure at that depth, the absence of light, the temperature near freezing, the scarcity of organic material settling down from the distant surface, every parameter that governs where biological communities can establish themselves said nothing lives here. And yet what the survey team found was a community, not isolated organisms, not individual creatures surviving at the extreme edge of their biological range. A community, multiple species in established ecological relationships, a food web, evidence of generations of reproduction, evidence of population stability. Something was eating something, something was being eaten, something had been doing this here at 336 meters, long enough to become stable, established, normal, the deepest normal on Earth. And here is what makes it strange beyond the strangeness of its existence. The primary energy source for this community could not be identified. It was not chemosynthesis. There was no thermal vent in the vicinity. It was not the fall of organic material from above. The survey team measured the organic input, and it was insufficient by several orders of magnitude to support the community observed. The community was eating something that the survey team could not measure and could not identify. It was running on an energy source that we do not have a name for. At 8,136 meters, in the dark, in the cold, in the pressure, something had figured out how to live on what we cannot see. The ocean remembers. This is not poetry. Seawater holds chemical records of every condition it has passed through: temperature, salinity, pressure, biological contact. When oceanographers drill sediment cores from the ocean floor, they are reading a physical memory, an unbroken record of what the sea has been through for millions of years. The ocean at any point is the sum of everywhere it has been: Arctic cold carried south by deep circulation, equatorial warmth carried north, the chemical signature of a specific river estuary drifting across an ocean basin over decades, arriving eventually at a point thousands of miles from where it entered the sea. Every sample of seawater is a document, an autobiography of its own movement. What this means, practically, is that the ocean is full of messages from elsewhere, chemical, thermal, biological messages from conditions and events that no longer exist, arriving at your instruments years or decades or centuries after they were written. The ocean is not just a present phenomenon, it is an archive, and an archive of something as large and as old as the ocean contains more than any instrument array deployed in any research program has the capacity to read. We are, in our understanding of the sea, at the earliest stage of learning a language. We have identified some of the letters. We have recognized that some combinations of letters seem to mean something. We have not yet read a sentence, but we are beginning. In the data of every anomalous acoustic signature, in every unexplained pressure event, in every photograph of something that should not be there staring back into the lens, we are beginning to read. The sentences are long, the language is old, and the ocean has all the time in the world to wait for us to understand it. It has been waiting, in fact, since before there was a concept of waiting, since before there was a mind to form the concept, since before the first organism in the first warm, shallow sea looked up at a sky that had no ozone layer yet and began the long, improbable process of becoming us. The ocean was there. The ocean is here. The ocean, when we are long gone and something else is asking questions about the world, will still be here, archiving everything, remembering everything, keeping its rhythms and its silences and its impossible signals in the dark, telling its long story to whatever has the patience and the instruments to listen. The last thing for tonight. In 2017, a research vessel conducting routine biological sampling in the Norwegian Sea lowered a plankton net to 500 meters and brought it up with the standard catch: copepods, krill, small medusae, the microscopic architecture of the ocean's food web. One of the researchers examining the catch under a microscope found something she did not recognize. Not an undescribed species, not a new organism, something that she described in the 3-line note she added to the margin of the sample log as having been arranged. The plankton in one section of the net, a section approximately the size of her palm, were not distributed randomly. They were in a pattern, alive, healthy, swimming, but oriented in a specific direction, spaced at specific intervals, forming, when viewed under the microscope at low magnification, a shape. The shape was not a word, it was not a symbol she recognized, it was a form, a specific, consistent, deliberate form that had been made in a net of living organisms at 500 meters depth by something she could not name and could not see, and that was gone by the time she thought to show it to anyone else. She logged the note and said nothing about it for 3 years. When she finally mentioned it to a colleague, she described why she had waited. She said, "I didn't tell anyone because I wasn't sure what it was trying to say. I'm still not sure. But I have been thinking about it every day since." The shape was not a threat. It was not a warning. It was, she thought, more like an introduction. The kind of gesture you make when you want to establish that you are aware of someone's presence and would like them to be aware of yours. Something in the Norwegian Sea, at 500 meters depth, in the dark, had noticed the net descending and had used what was available, the small living things suspended in the water column, to compose, briefly and precisely, a message. The message was in a language she did not have. But the intention behind it was one she understood completely. It meant, "I am here. I have always been here. And now I know that you are too." The sea floor of the Mariana Trench, the Philippine Trench, the Tonga Trench, the Izu Ogasawara Trench, the deepest places in the ocean, contain sediment that has been accumulating for millions of years, an unbroken record of everything that has sunk from the world above. In those sediments, researchers have found microplastics, human-produced synthetic polymers at the absolute bottom of the deepest places on Earth, in quantities that suggest the contamination began within decades of the mass production of plastics in the mid-20th century. We have been sending material to the deepest places on Earth for less than a century. The sediment there has been building for 50 million years. We have left our mark on every centimetre of this planet's ocean floor within the geological equivalent of a breath. This is not a mystery in the way that a bell ringing at 10,000 meters is a mystery, or in the way that a spiral pressed into the sediment by an unknown hand is a mystery. But it is a fact that sits at the heart of all these mysteries, that contextualizes all of them, that gives them their particular weight. We have barely been here. The ocean has been here since before the moon formed in its current orbit, and in the fraction of geological time that we have existed on this planet, in the vanishingly small sliver of cosmic time that represents the entire span of human civilization, we have left our polymer fingerprints in the deepest trench on Earth. Everything we do reaches the bottom. Everything that reaches the bottom stays. And what was there before us, what is still there with us, patient and ancient and in possession of far more of this planet than we have ever occupied, watches all of it arrive, and has perhaps been waiting for us to understand that arrival for longer than we have been capable of understanding anything at all. There is a whale that has been recorded singing at 52 Hz since at least 1989. All known whale species sing at frequencies between 10 and 39 Hz. The 52 Hz whale sings at a frequency that no other whale uses, and that, by the acoustic logic of whale communication, no other whale can hear. It moves through the Pacific in patterns consistent with whale migration, alone, season after season, singing in a language that belongs to no species, that reaches no recipient, that has been heard by human instruments for over 30 years, and by nothing alive for as long as we can tell. Researchers debate whether it is a hybrid or a whale with a malformed vocal anatomy, or a member of a species we have not catalogued. What is beyond debate is that it sings every year, in the Pacific, in a voice that carries across thousands of miles of open ocean to instruments that can hear it and to nothing else. It is the loneliest sound in the world, or it is not lonely at all. Perhaps it knows exactly who it is singing to, and perhaps what it is singing to is not something that uses ears. Perhaps the 52 Hz frequency is not a malfunction but a choice, a tuning, a deliberate setting of the instrument to a register that reaches something we cannot measure. Perhaps it has always been answered. Perhaps the answer comes from somewhere that our hydrophones, pointed outward into the water, cannot face. The remotely operated vehicle that returned from the Hadal pelagic zone of the Kermadec Trench in 2023 brought back footage that the team has not publicly released in full. What they have described in a paper presented at a conference in Auckland and later summarized in a brief report is a formation on the trench wall at approximately 9,400 meters that appeared, in the footage, to be breathing. Not a geological process, not hydrothermal activity. A slow, rhythmic movement of the rock face itself, a gentle in and out that the lead scientist described in the conference presentation with visible discomfort as indistinguishable from the respiration of a large organism. The wall of the trench at that depth appeared to be alive. The paper was careful. It described the phenomenon as an optical artifact requiring further investigation. The conference audience, experienced oceanographers and marine scientists, was, by multiple accounts, very quiet during the presentation. Nobody laughed, nobody offered an alternative explanation from the floor. The scientist presenting said in closing that she was not claiming the trench wall was alive. She was claiming only that the footage showed something she could not explain, and that until she could explain it she was not going to pretend it was nothing. She returned to the Kermadec Trench earlier this year. The results of that follow-up expedition have not yet been reported. The trench is 10,047 meters deep at its deepest point. The pressure there is approximately 1,000 times the pressure at sea level. The temperature is just above freezing. Nothing by the logic of the conditions should be able to do anything that resembles breathing. The trench wall breathed anyway, and whatever it is that the trench contains, whatever lives in the rock, whatever moves at the boundary between stone and water at a depth that our best technology can barely reach, it has been there for longer than the species that is now, with its cameras and its ROVs and its conference papers, beginning to notice. The Deep Sea Observatory off the coast of Monterey Bay recorded, on an otherwise unremarkable Tuesday morning in October 2022, a sequence of pressure pulses at the base of the continental shelf that the monitoring team spent 3 days trying to attribute to a natural source before concluding carefully that they could not. The pulses were not seismic. The pattern was wrong, too regular, too brief, too clean at their edges. They were not biological. No known organism at those depths produces pressure disturbances of that magnitude. They arrived in groups of 7, separated by pauses of exactly 91 seconds, and each group was slightly louder than the last, as if whatever was producing them was either moving closer or increasing the energy of each pulse deliberately. The sequence lasted for 4 hours and 14 minutes and then stopped. In the 91-second pauses between each group of 7 pulses, the hydrophones recorded something that the lead analyst described in internal communications as the acoustic equivalent of holding your breath, a period of such complete ambient silence that the instruments registered it as anomalous in itself, as if the ocean in the vicinity of the pulses were going quiet in anticipation of each new group. She submitted a paper, it was reviewed. The reviewer's primary comment was a request for an alternative explanation. She could not provide one. The paper has not yet been published. The observatory continues recording. The pulses have not returned, but the 91-second silences at the held breaths between something's counts still appear in the data from time to time, alone now, without the pulses that originally framed them, as if something is still counting, still pausing, still waiting for whoever is listening to finally understand the rhythm it is keeping. 4 hours and 14 minutes. Groups of 7, 91 seconds between each. The numbers mean nothing to the analysis team. They have searched for mathematical significance, for tidal correspondence, for biological cycle matches, for any framework within which the sequence makes sense. They have not found one. The sequence is what it is, a count in a pattern from something that counts in a way we have not yet catalogued, in water that is 950 meters deep off the coast of California, on a Tuesday in October, directed at instruments that were designed to listen for earthquakes, and instead heard something deciding for 4 hours to make itself known. The oval that opened in the water north of Rockall Bank held for 17 seconds. Not a wave, not a current phenomenon. A clean parting of the surface, a perfect oval, horizontal, standing a meter above the waterline, through which was visible not the ocean below, but a blackness too absolute to be shadow, that did not reflect the sky above it, that light bent away from rather than into. The crew of the cargo vessel that witnessed it stood at the rail in silence. No one spoke during the 17 seconds. No one reached for a phone or a radio. There was something about those 17 seconds, one crew member said later, that made the idea of recording it feel wrong, feel like an intrusion on something that was happening, whether or not you were watching it. The oval closed the way a mouth closes, with intention, with the specific geometry of something that has finished what it was doing. When sonar was checked, the breach had left no cavity. The surface had not rippled outward. The water above was perfectly still. A physicist who reviewed the data suggested then retracted, the phrase dimensionally displaced. But she did not retract the data. Whatever used that door left quietly. The sea did not resist. The sea, if anything, seemed to understand. These are the things the ocean contains, or hides, or is. They are not legends, they are measurements, recordings, observations by trained people in controlled conditions who wrote down what they saw and what their instruments showed, and who are still, quietly, without resolution, living with the gap between what they observed and what they can explain. The ocean covers 71% of this planet. We have mapped approximately 20% of the seafloor in detail. The rest is a territory larger than all the land on Earth that we have not yet visited, where the pressure forbids our presence and the dark forbids our sight, and whatever has been there, undisturbed, for millions of years, continues to be there, in the places where sound travels before it exists, where spirals are drawn in the mathematical language of galaxies, where bells ring in the dark and something waits for the reply. The water is very deep, the signals continue. And somewhere beneath the surface of the world's largest mystery, something breathes in and breathes out, patient as a sea that has been here since before the continents found their shapes, waiting for the question that is the right question to ask. The brine pools move with direction. The compasses spin in their cases years after the dive that changed them. The coral listens with cochlear chambers. The monolith grows after earthquakes in places it has no reason to know about. The bell rings in the dark and waits. The 52 Hz whale sings its song into a frequency where nothing answers back, or into a frequency where the answer has always been coming and has simply not arrived yet in any form that our instruments can receive. Something in the Norwegian Sea arranged plankton into a form that meant I am here, and waited to see if anyone noticed. Something at 8,836 meters lives on an energy source we cannot name. Something made a spiral on the Nazca Plain and came back to sharpen the edges. Something at Station Delta arrived and found the researchers and left the coffee still warm, and left no other trace of what it had done or where it had taken them. You are on the surface. The surface is thin. Beneath you right now, wherever you are in the world, the ocean floor extends further down than any skyscraper stands tall, and across a distance wider than any continent, and in that space, in the dark and the pressure and the cold, things are continuing that our instruments have only begun to hint at. Drift now. Let the weight of the day settle. Let the darkness behind your eyes be the darkness of deep water, where the pressure is a constant and the cold is a constant, and the only things that move are things that have always known how to move in the dark. The ocean is patient. The ocean is old. And the ocean at the bottom of the world, in the places where our lights have never reached, and our instruments can only gesture toward, the ocean has a secret it has been keeping since before there was anyone to keep secrets from. We are, slowly and imperfectly and with instruments that are barely adequate, beginning to listen. Sleep well. The ocean will be there when you wake. It has always been there. It has always been watching. It has never, not once, in all the uncountable years of its existence, run out of things to tell.